Alright guys, I'm back for part 2 of the LS swap how-to video. Um, I did not take a lot of videos of doing this swap, however, I took a lot of photos, so I hope this can help people. I know it's not the greatest not having videos and all that kind of stuff, but I hope that can help and point you in the right direction. So the issue I ran into before was that this is a four-wheel drive transmission, and I needed a rear-wheel drive. I looked around on Facebook Marketplace, eBay, and all that kind of stuff, and people wanted a lot of money for these 4L60s. Mind you, I know that these 4L60s are prone to exploding under their own power, but I'm running it now, and we're just gonna go from there. And if it blows up, it blows up. It is what it is, but um, I mean, for how much I paid for the engine and transmission, I mean, it owes me nothing, honestly. So, what you do to convert it to rear-wheel drive is take out the torque converter and you remove these 6, 7, 8 bolts right there, and that's for the pump. And then you got your input shaft right here. So yeah, remove that and take off the bell housing bolts. I'm sorry, you got to take off the bell housing bolts first and then the pump. So once you remove the pump, you got to pull out the this I believe it's an input drum. I think it's for the first and reverse. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, so you pull those out. And mind you, you don't have to take off this valve body over here at all. You just got to take off the pan just to get a couple of sensors out of the way so you don't break it when you're removing the pump and all that. And this is what the valve body looks like on the underneath. I looked in there, everything looked pretty good. I didn't see any metal shavings or nothing like that. So this transmission looked like it was in good, decent shape. So I left everything it is. Be careful. What I did was I actually wound up breaking this lockup solenoid, which is that little tan solenoid right there. I wound up breaking it off when I was pushing the pump back in. So just be careful with that. You got to remove this out of here. I think it's a 10 millimeter bolt, and you got to move this solenoid out of the way. It's really easy to do it, but yeah, just be careful because a lot of things in there are plastic and very brittle. So here's another picture of this little drum set right here. So here's a 2/4 band on the inside right here. I actually wound up flaking off. I'm not sure why I did that, but the band was starting to flake off, so I wound up getting a new band for it. It's a 2/4 band. I wound up getting a high energy, like high horsepower one, even though it's probably going to blow up either way. But if I put more power into it, but yeah, figure I might as well do it. It's almost the same cost as an OEM one, anyways. In here is your planetary gear set. I believe this is a 4 pinion. The 5 pinions are stronger, but the 4 pinions are fine, I guess. So you get the snap ring off. It's pretty a pain to get in there, but you got to get the snap ring off in there and pull out that pinion assembly. So that's what it looks like when you pull it out. And that's where you get to the guts. So right here is your output shaft, right here. And what you do is you slide that out and you slide in the new one. So this is the four-wheel drive shaft on the left, and the rear-wheel drive shaft is on the right side. As you can see, they're a lot longer for the rear-wheel drive. So that's why you have to swap these out. You can't just, you just slide it in there and it'll work. It doesn't work like that. So this is the two-wheel drive shaft, and yeah. So that's what it looks like when putting the new shaft in and the new housing. It's a lot longer than the four-wheel drive. And here's a backside picture. You're also going to need a output speed sensor. I wound up getting a new one. I think because I broke the other one from the when we were pulling the engine out of the Tahoe. I think we wound up just snipping the wires and breaking the old one off because I didn't need the transfer case at all, because that's what on the four-wheel drives, the sensors in the transfer case. So here's the front side of it. This is what it looks like with the bell housing removed. The pump isn't sitting in the transmission yet. I think I still had to jiggle it in there. Here's another issue I ran into, was getting the front pump seal to seat properly. I wound up using a electrical tape roll, which fit on there perfectly, and then I used a lift for like a car lift. I used like a little extension arm on there, and I just tapped it on with a hammer, and it actually went on there nice and flush. So here's the biggest issue that probably cost it almost the same amount as the engine, which was the oil pan. So I bought an oil pan from Weinand, Weinand oil pan. It was a front sump oil pan. They were back ordered for a while, and I waited for like a month, and it still didn't come. And they kept pushing on my shipping date, kept pushing it back every 2 weeks. So I just wound up canceling that, and I wound up just taking the plunge and getting a Moroso oil pan. The Moroso oil pans are about $100 more. I think this one was like $450 almost. But these do come with a little hole to run a dipstick, which you'll see later on. But the dipstick comes extra. But this one has baffles in it. You can't see it in here, but it's got baffles and everything in it. It's pretty fancy oil pan, but it worked great and worked for my application. That's what it looks like on the side. And this is a front sump oil pan, so the sump is in the front as opposed to being in the rear of the engine back here, you know. So this is the motor upside down. I had it on an engine stand, flipped it upside down, popped the pan off, popped the windage tray off, and this is what it looks like. So this is in the rear of the engine. There's just a couple of pictures of what it looks like inside the engine, because a lot of people actually never get to see the inside of an engine. So I figured it'd be cool for you guys to see it. Right here is where your oil inlet and oil outlet for your filter go. Yeah, here's the next couple of pictures. And this yellow or brown staining on here is just from oil over the years. But everything looking good inside. Nothing looked too crazy worn out. Right here is where your pickup tube goes into. Obviously, going from a rear sump system to a front sump, you have to change this out. I wound up using a front pickup tube for a GTO. On the GTOs, they actually are the only LS cars that were front sump engines. So I just got a pickup tube for that, and it actually bolted right up perfectly fine. It worked great with the pan. There was just enough clearance in the pan for oil pickup. I think you want like 3/8 of an inch to, I think about 3/8 of an inch at the very least, between the bottom of the pan and where the pickup tube is. Here's down in the cam. The cam looked pretty good. Nothing looked crazy worn out. I think this engine had about 120,000 miles on it, but it looked pretty decently taken care of. Some more pictures of the cam down in there. So after I got that all the oil pan stuff done, I set the engine in place, just feeling it out to see where everything's going to go, where it's going to sit, how high it's going to sit, how forward it's going to sit. I wound up getting the oil pan to sit right in between the subframe, which you'll see later on. But yeah, I was getting it set in place, just trying to get it centered up so I can start fabricating up the engine mounts. So the motor mounts that I'm using are LSX Innovations Universal motor mounts, and what they are is they're like 7 inches long, and they're like triangular pieces. And all you do is you cut them down to the curvature that you need, and you just weld them in to the subframe, and that's it. And they're solid motor mounts. They're 1/4 inch thick, so they're pretty sturdy motor mounts. They also have polyurethane inserts in them, so that it's not like a crazy rough ride, but it's a little more aggressive. So here's you can see that the oil pan is sitting right in between the subframe. It's a pretty tight fit. I mean, really tight. Like there's probably a 1/4 inch of clearance on both sides. But because I'm running the solid motor mounts, I'm not too worried about the engine flexing and damaging the pan up against the subframe or anything like that. But something you got to be careful about. So I put the front support bracket in place just to see how much clearance I have. It looked like I had a lot more clearance here, but as you can see or you'll see later on that the clearance is a lot tighter. But it worked out. So yeah, I was just sitting in place. I lowered it down a lot more. The goal was to have the engine to sit as low as possible and try to clear the hood. I didn't want to cut into the hood at all, but I wound up actually getting it to work. So this is what it looked like underneath. The front subframe or the front sway bar that you see right here is actually like, I don't know, like 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch away from the bell housing. But I'm not worried about the transmission or anything like that, like sliding forward or backwards. It's just the rotation of the engine, like the twisting of the motor, is the only thing I might be worried about, but nothing to nothing to be worried about at all. If you see right here, the on these Dodges, I don't know why, but the steering column, I'm sorry, yeah, the steering column wobbles when you are turning the steering wheel. I'm not sure why they did that in these cars. I've never seen the steering column like wobble like that. And my buddy has a Charger, and it does the same exact thing. Where when you turn the wheel, it wobbles around in like a circle, kind of. But it actually wound up hitting the bell housing just the hair, just to clean off the paint off of the column. But I didn't have any interference issues really. It didn't stop the car from turning or anything like that. So over time, it'll just self clearance itself, honestly. So I'm not too worried about that. The car turns perfectly fine. So this is what it looked like with the mounts in place. I wound up using cardboard and cutting to the size that I needed to, and um, use that cardboard to transfer it to the metal, and then I wound up cutting the metal out. So that's what it looked like right there. They're not welded in yet, but yeah, I was just trying to get the mounts close enough to what I needed. Here's a better picture of the mounts in place. And mind you, these motor mounts, right on the plates on the engine side, you can slide the engine forwards and backwards. So if you mess up the mounts a little bit, you still are able to slide the engine forward and backwards, but not side to side or anything like that. But it gives you a degree of movement at least. And here's this side as well. There's a couple of gaps on the the motor mounts, but we wound up filling that in with wire. And you can see the gap in this one as well. Not too happy with it, but it was really tricky to get the curvature of the motor mounts to work pretty good. So I tacked them in place. Used a Harbor Freight welder. It's a flux core welder for like 180 bucks. It was a titanium one. Actually, I bought it for doing the motor mounts, but I decided against doing that and just get it a professional to do it. And just so they're solid and they stay in there, don't have to worry about it. Especially with that $450 oil pan in there, I don't want anything to happen to it. It's just easy insurance, and it was pretty cheap to have a guy actually weld it for me. So yeah, I just tacked it in place for him. once you tack them in place, then you can pick the or take the bolts out of the motor mount and pick the motor out and send it on down to the shop to get it welded in. So here's a couple more pictures of the tacks, and this is a couple of days after sitting in the rain water. So that's what it looked like with the motor pulled out. As you can see, the pan sits right in between here, in between the rack and the subframe. And mind you, I did all of this on the ground. I didn't have a lift or anything like that. Nothing too fancy. So you could do it yourself. So this is what it looked like after it was welded in. We filled in all the gaps, and so far it's really, really sturdy. I mean, there's absolutely no flex in the engine at all. And we welded them in on both sides and filled in all the cracks. Not the most beautiful welds, but they do the job. So. And then these holes right here where the old motor mounts went into, I tried to get them in between there, but due to where the motor was sitting, that was the best I could do. So afterwards, after they're all welded in, I wound up painting the subframe just to keep it from rusting, so I don't have to worry about that down the road. So I cleaned everything up with a little bit of black spray paint, nothing crazy or fancy. I didn't tape anything off, so there's overspray all over the place, but you know. Next, I was worried about the flanges on the engine for mocking up the exhaust pipes. So it's weird on the LS engines. They actually have the exhaust flanges are different on both sides. One side is 2¼ inch. Yeah, 2¼ inch diameter, inner diameter exhaust port, and then on the other side it is 2½ inches. So there's obviously a significant difference right there. So I wound up buying flanges from eBay for like 20 bucks, I think, for both of them. They're kind of expensive, but they're cut to fit and they worked really good. You, uh, yeah, so you just put these flanges on here, on these bolts, and you weld the exhaust to the flanges, and that way you can remove it from the manifold without having to, weld it to it or anything like that. So that's what it looked like. This is when the engine was on the engine stand when I was working on a couple of things. And this is where we're at. So we got I wound up moving the car to a different spot, but that's the motor, or this is the oil pan sitting in there in the front. Everything was put on. I had I painted the motor mounts and painted a couple other things and try to clean up the motor. There's a little bit of oil on it, just trying to clean it up a little bit. I didn't go too crazy with it, mind you, because this is just my first LS swap, so I was just trying to get it running, honestly. Just get it running and driving and then go from there. And then there's the transmission sitting over there. And yeah. And then here's the last picture I'm going to show you for the second part video. This is it sitting in place. It was all bolted into the car and it was just sitting there on its own self. And then I started running the wiring from the harness. I still have a lot of exposed wire, but I wound up covering that up with conduit later on. I was just trying to, because it doesn't go into a Tahoe anymore, I wanted to leave the wires exposed in case I have to like trace any wires, which I had to do a lot of. I had to trace a lot of wires because I ran into a couple of issues of like broken wires and stuff like that. So yeah, and I'm going to be running the ECU in the front. It's currently staying in the front for now. I tried running in the back here in this firewall, but it didn't work out. The harness was kind of too short for a couple of things. Yeah. So that is it for part 2, and stay tuned for part 3.